Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for a review of the 1857 novel by Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary. This is the first novel by the French realist, author, and novelist Gustave Flaubert. Born and raised in the northern part of France, he did spend some time in Paris, where he initially pursued a career in law. He did eventually drop that career, ended up moving back to the north of France, where he pursued a very long affair, and during that time attempted to get into the novelization game, I suppose you could say. But he had a couple of false starts during that time period, and it ended up taking until his late 30s before he finally produced his debut work. And what a debut it was as far as the public reaction to it. He was brought into court on charges of obscenity because of this novel, but he was also revered by a lot of people. Certainly people, I think, in the generation immediately after him began flaunting this novel as one of the best of its time, one of the best of all time. And to that end, it has still, I think, retained that renown even in the modern day. This was not a novel that I had read prior to this, but I was certainly aware of the influence. Certainly when you think of the idea of realism, that was becoming much more prominent during the middle part of the 19th century. Realism as an idea, if you're not familiar, it basically means what it sounds like. It is this focus on not necessarily elevating things and making things more grandiose than they are, but focusing on real things, real events, and real thoughts, especially. And that's what Madame Bovary, I think, does exceptionally well. And what I think is its strongest point probably is the fact that it is a very much an internal psychological piece, in the way that things like Jane Eyre, I think, is another example of a novel that focuses a lot on the main protagonist's internal thoughts. And this kind of takes that idea and ratchets it up a few notches. Worth noting as well, this is the translation by Geoffrey Wall that was released by Penguin Classics in the early 2000s. It might be a little bit older than that, actually. But overall, it's interesting for me as someone who reads the reactions to these books and reads some reviews of these books before going in. It's interesting for me to compare that perception, what I thought this book was going to be, and what it ended up being. The sense that I got from a lot of these reviews and a lot of these thoughts that people are posting on places like Goodreads and Amazon and what have you, is that this book is emotional and it's a tearjerker, and the main protagonist is extremely sympathetic, and everything else. A good old-fashioned romance book in that sense. And that was not my perception of it at all, if I'm being perfectly honest. The character of Emma Bovary is, first off, a remarkable character, a superbly well-written character. And she is subjected to one of the most interesting evolutions from start to finish of any character that I think I've come across so far in this whole dive. Just the beginnings, and in that sense, that's the tragedy of it, I suppose, because she starts off as a character who is very wholesome, I suppose, someone who is a bit of a dreamer, I suppose, someone who dislikes the mundane, and you sort of watch her get driven to incredible extremes because of her dislike of that mundane. And you see her turn from, again, this very amiable character at the beginning to kind of a full-fledged monster at the end, who ends up, destroying herself one way or another. The thing is, though, there's tragedy in that arc, but I don't think the writing presents her in the most sympathetic light. It almost feels like we as the reader are not intended really to sympathize with her. And maybe some of it is because she turns pretty early on. Because the whole idea here, right, is that she gets married very early on in the book, but she finds her new husband to be a complete bore, very like self-obsessed, very obsessed with his career, and he genuinely loves her and genuinely cares about her, and that is very evident because as she is destroyed, it kind of ends up becoming his destruction as well. But she sort of discards him, I think. And there's a little bit of a back and forth too, where sometimes things are okay in their home dynamic, but then sometimes she wants something else, and then she starts having affairs and things of that nature. And to me, the way that it changes and the speed with which you understand, okay, this is what we're about. This is going to be, it's going to be one of those like stories where there's like this big hidden secret that is being kept and the main character is not being transparent. The main character is doing some kind of shady shit ultimately, right? Because of how quickly we come to understand this, I really don't think this is meant to be a sympathetic narrative towards Emma. I think this is meant to be not necessarily something where we're mocking her. I don't think Flaubert mocks her in any sense, but I think we're sort of meant to just kind of sit there and just take in whatever we're reading and just follow this psychological journey in the way that one might watch a train derailment, honestly, just in the sense that it's kind of horrifying. And again, sad in that sense, but not something where I feel like I can empathize with the character. And that hasn't been a barrier for many of these books in this journey, even books where the main character is not maybe as sympathetic as one would expect. But here, to me, I think it's just, I think there's more commentary here. It's not just the destruction of one person. I think there's also, when analyzing the affairs of Emma Bovary and her flings with these different men, and then towards the end, how she attempts to prostitute herself, I suppose, because she gets into very severe debt and needs to find a way of paying it off or getting it forgiven. There's a whole commentary there, I think, about devotion and how it's portrayed in romance novels and literature about romance. And it kind of questions, it kind of causes us to question, I think, what it means to love and whether devotion in and of itself is as healthy as maybe our culture presents it as. It feels like, in a way, Flaubert is kind of taking the standard plot, the standard idea, premise of a romance novel and perverting it and kind of turning it on its head and exposing the darker sides of it. It's fascinating, and it's one of those works too, I think, we're just even trying to talk about it now. I think this is a book that is well worthy of a second read to really kind of sit with the journey once you know how it ends. But it's, to me, it's a fantastic book. It's one of the best ones that I've reviewed on this channel in a while, I would say. And again, I don't want people to take away from this review that the book has a premise that is completely dismissive of the main character. I haven't talked much about the side characters. To me, I think most of them are pretty ancillary. It is all about Emma. It is Emma's world, and we are all living in it. I suppose I can shout out the pharmacist in this, who's kind of a, I don't know, interesting character. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about him, but this is Emma's world, and we're all living in it. I don't want people to take away that this is a narrative that is dismissive of Emma, nor do I think this is a novel that is rooted in sexism or sexist assumptions. I think if anything, it's kind of the opposite, because Emma is portrayed as a very strong-willed individual, and I don't think that her destruction is blamed on any sort of traits that are inherent to her being a woman, if that makes sense. I don't think this is meant to be this moralizing piece of work about how adultery is bad, cheating on your husband is bad, and you were morally wrong for doing it. Like, no, we're inside her head. We're listening and reading her thought processes. We can understand, like, we're following it, even if we're not sympathizing. We are following her thought process, and I don't think I just don't believe that there is any sort of moralizing or clear moral that Flaubert wants us to take away from this. I think this is more an attempt to get inside the brain of one particular situation and one particular person, and just, I don't know, see the tragedy that can arise from some of these unrequited love situations, these relationship mismatches that are maybe dramatized or sort of painted over with a bright sheen in other romance novels. So, yeah, it's hard to say. I would not recommend this book, I think, if I thought that there was a clear sexist angle towards the underlying message. But from what I read, and from the very little bit that I've read as far as the background of this novel, I don't see it. I think this is purely a realist, sort of psychoanalytical piece that just invites us to watch what is happening and sort of lets us come to whatever conclusions we want to. And it succeeds with flying colors. It's fantastically written. I think the translation is incredible, very evocative language, very descriptive and very vibrant choices of words here that I would imagine captures the spirit of the original novel very well. And yeah, I don't have anything else to really say. I think I would highly recommend it. It's not an easy read necessarily, but it's not especially long. And again, I think if you're interested in that kind of piece, if you go into it knowing this is not a romance novel, this is not a novel where you're maybe going to come away liking the main character, and if you do, then great. Obviously, a lot of people do. I just was not one of those people. And yeah, just know you're in for a trip. But to me, I think the quality of the writing and the uniqueness of the story that is being told here, especially compared to other novels from this period, to me make it all worth it. So I highly recommend it, and I'm very curious to know your thoughts. With that, thanks so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. I would really love to know what your thoughts are on this book in particular. I'm sure there's a lot of different opinions on it out there. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time, right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.